Okay, so we're going to try again. We've had a lot of technical issues in this class, so we're going to try again to make it so that you can hear and see everything this week. Thanks for all of your patience with hearing the links and working through things and being excited still about all of these things that we're learning. So appreciate all of you guys, and I've been impressed with what you're writing too. Okay, so welcome to Module 4. Let's take a look at things, and give me a second. I'm going to extra double check all things this particular day. Well, maybe. Let's go back and try that again. Well, as we start with the technical problem, this is fantastic, right? For some reason, it's not letting me share anything with you. This is great. Okay. Boy, we've just had every single problem we can possibly have with this class, have we not? Okay, here we go. We'll try it a different way. Fingers crossed, right? Okay, there we go. Okay, Module 4 again. I tell you what, COVID has not made this easier. Has it? No, it has not. Okay, so in Module 4, we're going to try something totally different. So far, you've been reading stories, short stories, and now we're kind of winnowing our way down or funneling our way down to poetry, which I'm sure some of you are really excited about and some of you are dreading, right? Because that's what poetry does. It kind of galvanizes us around a particular point of view. I love some poetry. I hate other poetry. There's no particular reason that you should love or hate any of the things that we show you, other than exposing yourself to new stuff. So what are you going to do? You're going to be reading first. Make sure you read the poetry, reading, responding, and writing section in the book. That'll help you to understand, like, what am I supposed to do with poetry, right? What, like, especially if you're not a poetry reader, this might be a new thing where you're a little bit intimidated by what the heck you should do with these things and how are you supposed to write about something that's so much tinier, shorter than other things. So definitely read these sections to help you with that. Then you're going to read Introduction to Poetry, which is actually a poem by Billy Collins. This Be the Verse by Philip Larkin. Ballad of the Landlord by Langston Hughes, and Daystar by Rita Duff. And we will encounter some of those during this video. Some of them you'll read, well, you all want to read all of them again anyway. Of course, you'll be doing a discussion post by Thursday, as always. Responses due to classmates by Sunday, but again, please do it on Friday or Saturday so you have time to think about these things. And then there's another set of poems after you do that. And we're not going to talk so much about those particular ones as we are about the first set. But one of these is what you're going to choose for your poetry analysis paper. You'll be researching that poem in EBSCOhost. We'll be talking about what that means to help you understand it. This may include something having to do with socio-cultural context or scholarly analysis or any number of other ways that you can interpret a poem, historical. There's all kinds of different ways. So we will encounter that as well. And so here we go. Let's just kind of start by diving into the first thing that we have to do, which is taking a look at your learning resources. All right, so when you look at the learning resources for this particular week, we have the lesson, of course. We have the information from the textbook with some page numbers, and then we have two more things here. We will look at these both individually. One is a web article, how to use EBSCOhost, which is what you'll be needing to understand before you dive into that paper. And the second one kind of talks to you about what do you do with organizing your essay around an explication thesis statement. And we'll make a little more sense to you when we dive into that. But first, let's look at the lesson. Okay. And by the way, if you haven't noticed, you can listen to these by clicking up here instead of reading them. So if you're one of those people that prefers to listen instead of read, there's an option for that. So what the heck is an explication? That's first where we want to start. It's a pretty common way to look at poetry or to study it. It's a really close reading of a poem. more close than you've probably ever read anything else before. So when you first, by the way, again, with poetry, just like with other types of writing, please read it first to just decide if you like it or not. And sometimes you'll like it more as you study it, and sometimes you'll like it less as you delve into it. But what explication is just really closely reading it multiple times and then taking a look at what are the word choices, what are the spacing choices, because sometimes poetry uses form to make some sort of meaning. What's the tone? What images are available to us? And then as we kind of analyze each of these particular pieces, we look at each of these pieces separately, and then we kind of synthesize it all together to go, okay, what does this mean? So again, like a short story, but much smaller scale, because poems are usually smaller, not always, but usually smaller. And it's very precise in what words they choose. So first, of course, you look at the literal meaning. What is the literal meaning of this? Is there a story? Is it a thought? Is it an insight? What is this poem actually about? And then you kind of look for things that might be hints to help you with that, right? Does the punctuation help? Sometimes there's no punctuation in a poem. Sometimes there's run-on punctuations from line to line. What does all of those things mean? Does it help you to understand the thought process? Are there questions? Are there exclamation points? What is there? And then study the diction. What's the word choices that the person has made? And the syntax, the order of the words in the poem. Those things are sometimes really powerful indicators of meaning. Think about clarifying their meaning. Sometimes when I'm reading poetry, I read with a dictionary, so I'm looking stuff up to make sure that I understand what the meaning of everything is. Think about what kinds of attitude certain word choices make. Do the words possess any sort of connotations or denotations or other things that are they racially charged? Do they have sarcasm in them? What are they conveying to us? And then looking at things like metaphors or personification. Personification is where we take like a piece of grass and we give it a personality, right? We sort of make the grass into a person by like say, oh look, the guy's mowing the grass and the grass is ouch, ouch, ouch. We personify stuff sometimes in poems just to give us, animals. We often give animals cute meanings or personality, right? So does that matter, right? So that's something we want to think about. The other thing we want to think about is form. Is the poem in any type of shape or form? Sometimes there's a lot of white space in poetry. Sometimes there's less. There's meaning in that. Is there a rhyme scheme? Is it rhyme? Does it not rhyme? Does it use any sort of syllables like da 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 da? Could kind of sound like a horse beat. Is there something that's partly there to give us some meaning? Sometimes poems have short lines, sometimes they have long lines, sometimes that, read it out loud so you might hear it and see it. So we've got lots of different types of forms that you're going to be looking at. And poems are meant to give lots of different meaning to lots of different people. There's a practice exercise here that kind of gives you all kinds of different things to look at. What's metonymy, what's diction, what's alliteration, what's a rhyme scheme, what's tone, rhyme, personification. These are all things that you can study a little bit by taking a look at through this little exercise. So I'll let you do that on your own. Then we want to think about how we might want to look at this poem in other ways. And one of those ways is socio-cultural context. So a poet is part of a specific time, right? Maybe they wrote a poem during the Civil War. Maybe they wrote it during COVID. Those things would definitely influence their thought process, right? So sometimes we want to study a poem. When was it written? What was happening at that time? What was the culture like? And how do those things influence my thought process on the poem, right? So sometimes that's relevant, sometimes it's not. So let's take a look at this one. This is Donald Hall. He wrote it after the birth of his son, and he called the poem "My Son, My Executioner." So let me read it for you. My son, my executioner, I take you in my arms, quiet and small and just astir, and whom my body warms. Sweet death, small son, our instrument of immortality. Your cries and hunger document our bodily decay. We, 25 and 22, who seem to forever observe enduring life in you and start to die together. Now, if I were you and I were encountering a poem, I would read it a couple of times, right, before really deciding anything about what I thought. In this one, the birth of the sun means something about the poet's own passage through life, right? Suddenly he's realizing that though, this new life is sort of shocking. Here it is all of a sudden out of nowhere, but it also shows that the parent is also closer to death, right? Is further along in life than the child. And you can really see that when you're holding a baby, how much time has passed between that child and yourself. Um, so just something to observe. Obviously, every brand new parent does not have that same thought process when they encounter their own children. That's just one response, right? So there's all kinds of different ways we can take a look at that and think about, is it important the time and the space and the place in which something was created? Okay. Now, you're going to be using scholarly databases to investigate your poems and find out what other people think. And again, these are the things you're going to be talking about here. I won't go through those with you because you can do that on your own. So let's get rid of that one. Okay. First, I want to encounter this EBSCOhost database, which I mentioned in that. Okay, I'm going to go back to okay, there we go. Let me share with you another piece, and this is the EBSCOhost. Okay, so if you opened this or downloaded and printed it out, this is going to talk you through exactly how to use EBSCOhost. EBSCOhost is just kind of a huge, enormous database that includes everything. So you can log in on campus, you can log in off campus. This will help you with how to do both and exactly where you should go to find it. Right? Library, indianatech.edu is where you're going to go. It's going to show you all the ways that this works. You can search by title, by database, by subject, by citation. And there's all kinds of free resources that'll help you figure out all the different pieces. But the first one that's always going to give you as an option is EBSCOhost because that's the biggest one and includes the most stuff. And so when you see these databases up here at the top, once you figure out how to get to this, you're going to want to go to E for databases. You can see this is database. This basically includes all of the rest of the things you're going to see there. So it's more of a provider of databases than a database. So it's going to be massively full of information. So you can click the boxes of all the databases you want to use, Academic Search Premier, medication information. You can unclick ones if you don't feel like it's useful to you. Basically, then you're going to use it like you would use Google. You'll have a box. You can put in search things that you're looking for. In this case, you'd probably want to put in the title of the poem, maybe the author of the poem, so you can see what's up there. And you're going to get all these different things that show you what to do. I'm not going to talk you through this whole thing because you'll have it printed out next to you and you can follow along with the instructions, but this is just to show you what it looks like. It does have all these great screenshots so you can see exactly what things are supposed to look like when you're there. Okay, so highly recommend printing that out and taking a look at it when you get to writing the paper and you're trying to figure that part out. The other thing that it gives you is this little thing about effectively using evidence. And we talked about when you get to the writing of the poem, and we're talking about explication. So let's figure out, how do you do that? This is a little bit more difficult. I'm going to talk through this, and then I'm going to kind of back up after this and talk you through a couple of various poems. So here we go.
One of the first things you'll often do is go back through that text and find specific quotes.
You know what? I don't think this is going to be loud enough. So I'm gonna not do this because for some reason it's not very loud on my particular computer, so it probably won't be in yours either. This is found in the Learning Resources lesson, so I highly recommend taking a look at this. This is by Nikki Buscemi. And it really is writing about poetry is a very different thing than probably what you're used to. So I do recommend looking at this so you can see how do you write about poetry, how do you do that explication. But clearly, maybe we're not going to do it. So we will spend our time instead looking at some specific poetry instead. Okay, so let's start with one of the ones you do. Ballad of the Landlord. This is a poem by Langston Hughes. Some of these things that we look at, I'm just going to have them read to you so you can hear them. And some of what we're going to do includes a little bit of explication. So here we go.
Ballad of the Landlord by Langston Hughes. This poem was written by Langston Hughes, 1902 to 1967. A Black American poet. The poem is about the conflict between the landlord and a tenant that emanates chiefly from the fact that the landlord demands his house rent, but he is not ready to repair the house. The resulting misunderstanding sends the tenant to jail without even a fair trial. Landlord, landlord. My roof has sprung a leak. Don't you remember I told you about it? Way last week. Landlord, landlord. These steps is broken down. When you come up yourself, it's a wonder you don't fall down. Explanation. The speaker repeatedly addresses his landlord, saying that his roof is leaking. The speaker already reported this issue to the landlord a week ago. The speaker repeatedly addresses the landlord again, this time saying that his front steps are broken. The speaker expresses surprise that the landlord doesn't trip and fall when he tries to climb up them. $10 you say I owe you? $10 you say is due? Well, that's $10 more and I'll pay you till you fix this house up new. What? You gonna get eviction order? You gonna cut off my head? You gonna take my furniture and throw it in the street? Explanation. The landlord, much to the speaker's indignation, demands that the speaker pay him $10. The speaker incredulously repeats the fact that the landlord thinks the speaker owes him $10. The speaker refuses to pay at all until the landlord makes these repairs and the speaker's house is as good as new. The speaker taunts the landlord, asking what he's going to do now that the speaker won't pay him. Will he kick the speaker out? Turn off his heat? Throw him and all his stuff out into the street? You talking high and mighty. Talk until you get through. You ain't gonna be able to say a word if I land my fist on you. Police, police, come and get this man. He's trying to ruin the government and overturn the land. Explanation. The speaker notes that now the landlord is getting a snobby attitude and talking down to the speaker. The speaker tells the landlord to just keep on talking, but that he won't be able to say a word if the speaker punches him. The landlord frantically calls for the police, saying, "Arrest this man. He's threatening the governmental order by threatening to not pay me and trying to spark a revolution." Copper's whistle. Patrol ball. Arrest. Princeton Station. Iron cell. Headlines in press. Man threatens landlord. Tenant held no bail. Judge gives Negro 90 days in county jail. Explanation. The policeman blows his whistle. The police car sounds its siren. The speaker is arrested. The speaker is taken to the local police station and put in an iron cell. The media write about his arrest, with a headline stating that a man who threatened his landlord is now being held in jail with no option to get out on bail. The man is black, the headline notes, and has been sentenced by the judge to 90 days in jail. Analysis of the poem. Conflict. The poem exposes the main conflict that existed in American society between the Americans of African origin against the white Americans. The reaction of both parties resulted into new conflicts without settling the previous ones. In the poem, the landlord is in conflict with his black tenant because of the house rent. The tenant agrees to pay on a condition that the house which has sprung a leak and the broken stairs should first be repaired. The landlord threatens to evict him from the house and the tenant threatens to beat the landlord. Racial discrimination. The poem shows the problems of racial prejudices and racial injustice. Blacks were treated as second-class citizens in America. They were not given their basic human rights and they had to fight for their rights by every possible means. The poet shows how racial tension grew to a point of resulting to a serious quarrel between the tenant and the landlord. The use of the word Negro, which is an offensive word used to refer to Black Americans, suggests that the blacks are abused in this society by their white counterparts. Blacks are sent to jail without bail, nor fail trial. Injustice. Furthermore, through the poet shows another problem that befell the Americans of African origin during the time of racial prejudice in America. Most Africans were accused falsely and sent to jail without fair trial. The events towards the end of the poem show a quick succession, suggesting that events were rushed from the arrest to the imprisonment of the tenant, without giving him a chance to give his views on the matter in question.
Okay, so you might totally disagree with that interpretation of the poem, right? Doesn't he have a great voice though? And that is okay. You're going to find that as you start researching some of the poems, listening to some, reading others, you're going to find that you disagree with a lot of things that you see. You might totally read something entirely differently, and that would be okay as long as you can find something from the poem that supports your particular explication or interpretation, right? And one of the beautiful things about poetry is that it's going to matter. Your own experience with this is going to really matter. So if you, as a child, maybe your family got thrown out of a house, you're going to have a wholly different viewpoint. Or if you feel like somebody in your family was accused unfairly of something, you're going to have a wholly different, much more visceral feel to this particular poem than somebody who hasn't, right? So keep in mind that your thoughts on all of these poems, any of these poems, might be very different than others. One of the things you're looking for is things from the poem that words, stanzas, space, all those things that we talked about that might give interpretation to the poem. Okay, so now I chose that one. I'm trying to choose some really different ways of looking at the particular poems that we're looking at here. Some of these you'll like, some of these you won't. This one I chose because this is This Be the Verse by Philip Larkin, and this is actually read by the poet himself. So that's wholly different. Let's take a look at this one.
This be the verse.
By the way, I should mention that this poem does have some words that are questionable as far as what you may want if you have children or other people in the room. You may want to do this particular one out loud in a different place. This is one of the poems that Indiana Tech chose. I didn't choose it, but I'm just giving you the warning that this is not acceptable to play probably in some workplaces or church places or family places. So you've had your warning.
They fuck you up, your mum and dad. They may not mean to, but they do. They fill you with the faults they had, and add some extra just for you. But they were fucked up in their turn by fools in old-style hats and coats, who half the time were soppy stern and half at one another's throats. Man hands on misery to man. It deepens like a coastal shelf. Get out as early as you can, and don't have any kids yourself.
You might be totally shocked by that one in different ways, right? The language, the deep sarcasm of it, the hopelessness of it, all kinds of different stuff. So one of the things that you might, if you'd like this particular verse and you wanted to study it, one of the things you could study would be a historical look at, like, when was this written? Who was Philip Larkin? Did he have any kids? Was he married? What was he? Like, so that might be relevant to his writing of the verse, right? Maybe he wrote it at one point in his life and then things changed at another point. So that might be a historical reading of it. It also might be that you want to know, when was this written? You know, was this written during a war? Did that have any bearing on his thoughts about not having kids? He talks about fools in old style hats and coats who half the time were soppy stern and half at one another's throats. So maybe, you know, you could do a little looking at that and go, what does that mean? You know, well, who are these people that he's talking about? There's also some very interesting images, like the coastal shelf, which might lead you to believe, you know, did Philip Larkin live near an ocean? What's a coastal shelf? If I've only lived in Indiana, I might not know what a coastal shelf is. Maybe I need to look it up, right? And why is he so against having children yourself? All right. So I won't play that one again, even though it's very short, and I usually would play it again for effect. I wanted to give you full warning about that, although it's an interesting poem, is it not? And the title of it, This Be the Verse. You might have to wonder, what does that even mean? By the way, there's lots of Philip Larkin poems, so if you liked his voice or his poem or his tone, you can find other ones fairly easily there. Okay, another one. This is, I should have started with this one really, because the title of the poem is Introduction to Poetry. And it's a poem by Billy Collins. This is a little bit longer and involves understanding it a little bit more. Again, you might totally disagree with this interpretation. You might see it a different way. That is okay. So here we go.
So let's take a look at the poem Introduction to Poetry by Billy Collins. Billy Collins has been a National Poet Laureate for the United States, and he's really known for his humor. So you won't be surprised to find some humor in this poem, especially with the twist at the end. Let's take a look. This is the Library of Congress's website, Poetry 180. It has 180 poems that are all fairly interesting and accessible, and I recommend them all. So here's Introduction to Poetry. I ask them to take a poem and hold it up to the light, like a color slide, or press an ear against its hide. I say, drop a mouse into the poem and watch him probe his way out, or walk inside the poem's room and feel the walls for a light switch. I want them to water ski across the surface of the poem, waving at the author's name on the shore. But all they want to do is tie the poem to a chair with rope and torture a confession out of it. They begin beating it with a hose to find out what it really is.
If you're a college student like me, especially, you need Grammarly in your life. Grammarly is a digital writing assistant.
Let's take a look at the very first stanza. I ask them to take a poem and hold it up to the light of the color slide. So when the speaker says, I ask them, we immediately know the speaker is saying, I ask readers of poetry, or I ask students, or maybe I ask teachers to look at a poem the way they would look at a special picture, a color slide. That you hold it up to the light and you try to figure out what you're seeing. It's a bit of a discovery. And so discovery is one of the attitudes he wants us to have as we approach a poem. And in the next line, or press an ear against its hive. So hive, a beehive, has a special sound. And he's asking us to press our ears against the poem. So yes, poetry makes noise, right? It makes sound. It has alliteration or it has rhyme. And the rhythm of the poem shouldn't be missed, right? We should enjoy the sonic elements of the poem. So the visual element, the sonic element. And then we go to the next part about a mouse, that we drop a mouse into the poem and watch it find its way out. So the poem is like a little puzzle, like a little maze that we want to observe not only how we puzzle it out, but how the poem puzzles out the issue it's exploring. So how does the poem solve the problem that it sets for itself, or if it's exploring a particular issue, how does it do that? You know, what moves does it make? What corners does it turn? What new roads does it find? So these are ways to explore the visual, the audio, the sonic, and then now this intellectual puzzle element of the poem. And then he uses the word water skating. So water skating across the surface of a boat, which is a really fun image. You know, it happens in open air with sunlight and water. It's very different than the desk that we often are at when we encounter a poem, or the screen where we encounter the poem. I think he's reminding us of the sensory joy of the poem. You know, the poem itself is an experience that we enjoy, and like water skating. So, okay, the other thing to note is that he talks about wading to the author's name on shore. And notice that the author is then, you know, not the center of attention. The author is over there on the shore. We're over here water skiing the surface of the poem. We're having fun with the poem and listening to the sonic elements and looking at the visuals, piecing together and puzzling out the things it's talking about. And the author is, you know, it's of interest, but it isn't the key factor, it's not the focal point. And so that's what this poem would say. When I truly want to study a poem in depth, I do tend to find out about the author or about the historical period in which the author lived. And if that author is in conversation with other poets, like responding to previous poems or influencing future poets. But for this poem, the author is really a side note and not the key thing. And I agree. You know, the poem should stand on its own, no matter who wrote it. Also, the end of the poem. Let's look at that. They begin. Oh, but all they want to do is tie the poem to a chair with a rope and torture a confession out of it. Oh, so instead of these interesting images, now we're at a very distressing image. They begin beating it with a hose to find out what it really means. Oh, it feels very violent to do this to the poem, you know, this torture and confession out of it. So the speaker here seems to say, don't be obsessed with the message of the poem so much that you miss the pleasures of the poem while you're trying to figure out what it means. As if all that matters is what it means. And once we figure that out, we can just throw it out. Instead, he wants us to enjoy the whole experience of the poem, the images, the sounds, the colors. Now, does it mean that we don't care at all what the poem means? Well, I think this is a humorous poem, and so the poet or the speaker of the poem has noticed that people do get kind of obsessed with finding the meaning at the expense of other aspects. But ultimately, I have to say, for myself, I do want to find the meaning of a poem, and I want to know, you know, what does this poem teach me about life, about being human, about living in some kind of open-hearted way. I want to know that. So, yeah, poems do have a meaning, although I will say some poems, maybe that isn't their goal, to impart wisdom. You know, some poems really are just pointing out stuff and letting the reader come up with whether they think there's a message or, you know, what the meaning is. But a lot of poems are trying to convey something, but maybe not just one thing. Maybe if we get obsessed with, like, what does it mean? You know, we're going to miss all the possibilities of what it means. And maybe, in particular, we're going to miss the joy of experiencing the poem. So I think this poet is saying, hey, set this meaning thing aside for a while. Loosen up. Just enjoy the images, enjoy the sounds, see where that takes you, the emotions. We can worry about the meaning later. We don't have to just like focus on the meaning at the cost of everything else. Yeah, well, that's my take on the poem. Feel free to leave your take on the poem in the comments. And
Okay, so I really should have started that with that one, right? With the intention that I hope you're actually going to enjoy some of these poems and not kill them with interpretation, right? We do want to interpret, we also want to balance the fact that poetry is supposed to be enjoyable. It's supposed to elicit some kind of emotion from us. It might be anger, it might be hatred, it might be joy, it might be all kinds of things, but we should have some kind of emotion that is elicited from reading through the poem. So Billy Collins obviously feels that very deeply and wrote Introduction to Poetry for us to explain. Okay, so the last one here, this is A Poet a Day. This is Rita Dove. And this is her actually on a TV show. She's on Bill Moyer's show, and she's reading this poem for us. So let's hear it.
Daystar. She wanted a little room for thinking, but she saw diapers steaming on the line, a doll slumped behind the door. So she lugged a chair behind the garage to sit out the children's naps. Sometimes there were things to watch. The pinched armor of a vanished cricket, a floating maple leaf. Other days, she stared until she was assured when she closed her eyes, she'd seen only her own vivid blood. She had an hour at best before Liza appeared pouting from the top of the stairs. And just what was Mother doing out back with the field mice? Why, building a palace. Later that night, when Thomas rolled over and lurched into her, she would open her eyes and think of the place that was hers for an hour, where she was nothing, pure nothing, in the middle of the day.
Wow, huh? Gives you a wholly different view of nap time, right? This is a poem that comes out of one of her books of poems called Thomas and Beulah. And this is telling the story of her life through most of the 20th century. So let me go down a little bit here so you can actually see this poem, Daystar. You'll be reading this one again. This one has a lot of images that you can see, right? She saw diapers steaming on the line, a doll slumped behind the door, right? Lots of really simple images, but ones that you really can vividly see and feel. The pinched armor of a vanished cricket, a floating maple leaf, right? What's Mother doing out back with the field mice? So there's just some really interesting words and images here. Now, this one's interesting also. When I mentioned before that sometimes it's good to analyze the poetry or the grammatical stuff. Like where's the sentence end? How does the punctuation work? So looking at this, we're used to having at the end of a line a period, right? But here, she wanted a little room for thinking, but she saw diapers steaming on the line. A doll, notice that is a comma, right? A doll slumped behind the door, right? The period is here, not here. There's actually a space here. The space is for us to stop and enjoy that image. Diaper steaming on the line, a doll slumped behind the door. So she wants us to really pause for a second. Anytime you see a space, especially in poetry, it's meant for us to pause. Okay? So sometimes there were things to watch. The pinched armor of a vanished cricket, a floating maple leaf. Notice that in poetry, the grammar isn't always the way it is with an essay, right? If I were writing an essay, I would probably put an and there, the pinched armor of a vanished cricket, comma, and a floating maple leaf. But that's not what happens here in this poem. poetry is written differently, often for very specific reasons, for how they want you to read it, how they want you to hear it, how the ear hears something, and how you visualize it when you're hearing it. So think about that with some poems more than others. This is one example of interesting grammatical stuff that you can take a look at. Here's another one. Other days she stared until she was assured when she closed her eyes she'd see only her vivid blood, period. Let's see. So a little bit about Rita Dove, if you want to do a historical analysis. She won the 1987 Pulitzer Prize for this book that this poem is in. She was the youngest and first African-American poet laureate of the United States, and was a consultant in poetry. She served as White House Presidential Scholar and a Fulbright Scholar, and was awarded with the National Medal of Arts. So if you want to see this entire interview, I will again post all of these things, but we're going to end this class, the last half an hour here or so, by listening to part of this interview. I know I think we have about 20 minutes left, so I'll play about 20 minutes of this, and then I'll post the interview in case you want to see a little bit more.
From the combative, ferocious, and vituperative field of politics, we repaired to a quieter place, arrested with a soul, if you will, against the tumult of our time. A few days ago, in the East Room of the White House, along with such greats as the actor Al Pacino, the sculptor Martin Currier, and the painter Will Barnett, President Obama presented the National Medal of Arts to the poet Rita Dove. The award makes Rita Dove the first person to receive all three of the nation's highest arts and humanities distinctions: the Medal of Arts, the Humanities Medal, which she received in 1996, and the title Poet Laureate of the United States. In fact, she served 2 terms as Poet Laureate, the youngest and the first African American to be named to that prestigious position. Rita Dove is the Commonwealth Professor of English at the University of Virginia and the author of 9 books of poetry, among them Pulitzer Prize-winning Thomas and Beulah, a collection inspired by Dove's maternal grandparents. Her latest work, the Penguin Anthology of 20th Century American Poetry, is a banquet of language, images, and ideas. This is not your usual anthology. The poems were selected for what they tell us about American history, our story. And if you never thought of poetry as a way to snatch the past from George Orwell's memory hole, you'll be thinking that after spending a few hours with this book. Rita Dove is the editor, the sole editor, which meant enormous freedom of choice and a great burden of responsibility. Rita Dove, welcome. I felt when I opened this book that I was diving into America's melting pot. Everybody was in there. And 176 poets swimming around with me. And I wanted to say to all the folks still on the edge of the pool, come on in. It's a fascinating place.
Oh, that's terrific. I'm glad you felt that way, because that's how I felt when I began working on this. I just felt, I felt I was in this amazing part. And there were all these people who had a little story to tell, and stories to tell about the way that they felt when they were living in this country.
In other words, the emotions they were experiencing while history was playing out?
Well, yes, their interior lives, because we all have these interior feelings that we carry while the larger picture is going on, right? While everything is being written down and marked off as something enormously important in history. And to remember the humanity behind the facts is, I wouldn't say that's all that poetry does, but it manages to do that as well.
So what did these poems in particular tell you about the 20th century?
I found that even from the very beginning of the century, the poets were wildly different from one another in a great kind of wonderful way. Wildly different. You would have someone as pristine and clear and stately as Elizabeth Bishop, and then you would have someone like Anne Sexton, Or to go even further, someone like Sherman Alexie, the power at the end of the world. And yet they could all coexist. Because there also exists, I think, in America, usually an understanding that there are many different ways to get at true feelings, and there are many different ways to express it. That was one of the things I discovered. I also discovered as we went through the century, you could really see the advance of women's rights, of civil rights, of immigrants' rights. You could see it in the way that more and more women, African American, Asian Americans, Latinos, uh, that more and more of them became published, became important poets, and their voices began to get heard.
You write in here about how a poem exerts its spirit upon the time in which it was created. Give me a couple of examples.
Here's an early example, fairly early example, and that would be T.S. Eliot's The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock, which um, was, we can't even imagine how radical that was, anymore. But a poem which traced the way in which a human being thought in the doubts that he had about this new century, and all of that was a very different way of tackling prostrate and talking about one's emotions. In other words, instead of making a pronouncement, I feel this way, or truth is beauty is truth, all of that, he said, let us go then, you and I, while the evening is spread out across the sky. Sounds all very poetical. Like a patient eating rice on the table. Something's different. But also, it's just, we're going to take a walk. What T.S. Eliot does is after he invites us to take that walk, like a patient eating rice on the table, you know that suddenly things are not going to be pretty all the time. And they're not going to be soothing. We're going to discover the rough edges together. But he takes his time. Let us go through certain half-deserted streets, the muttering retreats of restless nights in one-night cheap hotels and sawdust restaurants with oyster shells. He's saying, I'm not going to let you get away, dear reader, with just coasting along. I'm taking you right down the alley with me. That's a different take on things.
One can think of all the optimism at the start of the 20th century. You think of all that optimism, and the bright future was coming, progress was coming, and then World War I, World War II, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, Iraq, Afghanistan. He has impressed upon his age, as you say, a sense of foreboding reality that always accompanied his human journeys.
He does that, and he does it in a very, very interesting and almost quiet way. Another poem that from about the same era is Alice Dunbar Nelson's poem "I Sit and Sew," which was published in 1920, 2021, somewhere around there. But now this is a really interesting poem because she was the wife of Paul Laurence Dunbar, and she wrote, I think, one of the most scathing anti-war poems, or war poems. It's not just war poems because although it's a tragic war, but it's also a feminist poem. It's called "I Sit and Sew." I sit and sew, a useless task it seems. My hands grown tired, my head weighed down with dreams. The panoply of war, the martial tread of men, grim-faced, stern-eyed, gazing beyond the ken of lesser souls, whose eyes had not seen death, nor learned to hold their lives but as a breath. But I must sit and sew. I sit and sew, my heart aches with desire. That pageant terrible, that fiercely pouring fire on wasted fields and writhing grotesque things once met. My soul in pity flings appealing cries, yearning only to go there in that holocaust of hell, those fields of woe. But I must sit and sew. The little useless seed, the idle patch. Why dream I here beneath my homely thatch, when there they lie, in sodden mud and rain, pitifully calling me, the quick ones, and the slain. You need me, Christ. It is no roseate dream that beckons me. This pretty, futile scene stifles me. God, must I sit and sow?
So what did that say that caused you to think that no matter what anyone else might think, you as the editor was going to include that in this anthology?
Number one, it's a phenomenal poem. I think it's an amazing poem. It's beautiful in a terrible beauty kind of way. What to think that there was a woman writing this kind of poem with that level of ferocity, and anger and grief, in the year 1920, to say what second, third, fourth grade feminists have been saying all along, let us into all of the arenas. We are human beings. We just want to just sit and sow when people are dying. And to also realize how horrible war is. It's incredibly graphic. It's incredibly beautiful. It has as a poem, it's exquisite. So it had to be.
And the voice that comes from her is a scream that one wouldn't have heard without the poem, right?
Without the poem, exactly.
Let me ask you about another poem you have in here that is in another place from another source, and I also interviewed this poet 2 or 3 times. Standing Units was one of the great poets of the last part of the 20th century, and he.
Okay. So we've had a chance to kind of listen to a little bit, give you a feel for what it's like to be in a poet's head, hear what it's like to be in a poet's head. Maybe you like that poet, maybe you don't, but there's all kinds of resources out there. You can hear poems from poets' mouths. You can hear poets discuss their meaning, their historical context. In this case, maybe even past historical context of other poets and how that has influenced them. Remember that there's lots of ways to read a poem. There's lots of ways to interpret a poem. What you're doing this week is really trying it out. We don't expect you to be experts by the end. We expect you to give it a try. I will be posting the links for all these again for you to take a look, as well as the one that was a little bit too quiet, so that you can listen to that one on your own to kind of help you write the essay itself. I know this probably will be a difficult paper to write for some of you, so I hope your week is going well, and I hope you're finding some poetry that you really are enjoying. So I'll take you back to the beginning here to take a look at what you have to do. Don't forget you have all of these things to accomplish this particular week, including the discussion board as always. So, okay, if there's anybody here that has any questions. Sometimes we have people, sometimes we don't. Okay, take care, everybody.